Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with first order? Now, I'm not referring to anything Star Wars related. Actually, I'm referring to a cosmological argument for the existence of God, which is sort of a cousin of the first cause or first cause argument. So, let's get to it. What's the argument, the first order argument? Well, number one, all caused order depends on and derives from prior caused order. Uh, this means anything that exists because something prior to it existed, which it turned into. It changed into it. So all caused order depends on and derives from prior caused order. Number two, an infinite regress of caused order is impossible. That simply means that if you go back in time and look back at all the things that caused other things to exist, you can't go back in time infinitely. There has to be a beginning of time, a beginning of the order, for any of the order to exist. Number three, you must therefore arrive at a first order. Because there has to be a beginning of time, a first order, because everything that comes after that bases its existence on pre-existing order. So, if there wasn't something before to cause the current state couldn't exist. So, because there's this series of basically cause and effect backward in time, everything derives its order initially from an initial order, a beginning order, and everything after that time evolves from that initial order. That's where it gets its existence. But you have to have an initial order in order for those subsequent events through time to occur. Otherwise, they can't exist. So there has to be a first order upon which all subsequent order derives its very existence. 4, because first order cannot come from either anything caused, which always has an order, or from nothing, because something cannot come from nothing, then first order must come from an uncaused God. So you need this initial first order for anything to exist at all. And the thing that causes that can't be something that itself is caused. Because then it couldn't be the initial cause, could it? It couldn't be the first order that causes the first order. So there has to be an initial first order. Very similar to the first cause argument. There has to be an initial cause of everything. And there also has to be an initial order. Something has to supply the initial order of a material creation in order for all subsequent creation to base its existence on. But that thing itself cannot be a caused thing. It can't be, otherwise it would be part of the causal chain of derivative orders, caused orders. So it's got to be an uncaused thing. So, and the only uncaused metaphysical reality is God. So God is the one who supplies this initial order for material creation. So the first order argument proves that God must exist because a first order must exist. And there's nothing that can cause a first order in material reality, because everything in material reality is itself caused and subject to time. So you're talking about something that is not subject to time, that is not caused, that is not material, that can supply the first order for material existence. And that we know as God. So this is a proof for the existence of God. So, what is order? Order is how things are arranged. Order is also information. Information contains what the order of things are. That is a form of information. Material reality. You can't help but have information in material reality, because material reality itself gives us information constantly. Every time it changes, every moment of time, the universe and material reality changes, and that gives us new information. So, first order is the arrangement of things and the information that implies. Anything real that's material, that's been created, has an order to it. And all created things move, constantly changing that order and that information. So, the first order argument is really about, well, where does that order come from? Where does that information come from? It's there, but where does it come from? So, for instance, let's say, you got a space, and there's this particle in this space, and this particle moves that way. That's information. That's information. If you look at it as sort of like a clock, the information about this particle is it's moving in the direction of 2:30. That's information. It's not moving in the direction of 12. That would be different information. It's moving in the direction of 2:30. That in of itself is information. So whenever you have anything at all that moves, you have information. So information is fundamental to material reality. It's everywhere. You can have far more complex information than just a moving particle, of course. And in the universe, it can get extraordinarily complex. But that complexity is still information. It's still order. I mean, you could have like three particles. Particle over here, particle over here, particle over here. This particle's going that way. This particle's going that way. This particle's going that way. That's information too. This particle's heading towards 9:30. This particle is heading towards 3:30. This particle's heading towards 5:30. And this is a two-dimensional surface, so you can expand this into 3 dimensions. And you could talk about the travel of each of these particles in the 3rd dimension. And the 4th dimension, time. We call that space-time, right? So every particle in the universe, everything in the universe, can be described in terms of its space-time, its location in space-time. That is information. That's order. So the question of where does all this order come from is a fundamental question. And the answer is God. And that's what the first order argument is. So, you get something even a little bit more complicated than just some moving particles in 4-dimensional space-time. What if you're talking about a light wave, A light wave traveling across the universe, right? Well, that light wave also has information, right? It's got a certain wavelength. It's got a certain amplitude. It has a certain frequency through time. That's all information. That's all order. All of it. It's order. Information, order. So the universe derives its existence from prior order and information of the things it's turned into, the prior things that changed and turned into it. So you can go back in time and then you figure out, hey, at some point there has to be an initial order. There has to be initial information because this stuff wouldn't exist because it's derived off of all that prior information, which ultimately has to start somewhere. It has to start at some time. And we call that beginning the Big Bang. Big Bang is when the first information, the first order appeared and created the universe. The first instance of initial order or appearance caused by God. That's why there was a Big Bang to begin with. Because you have to have an initial order for all subsequent order to exist. And that order begins as a point. And then it expands as that order changes over time. And then that's how we get the universe. But you have to have that seed, that initial seed, that first appearance of order, or you won't get anything. That's how it works. It's obvious, really. If you want to grow a tree, well, you're gonna have to have an acorn to start it. And that's what the Big Bang is, in a way. It's an acorn. And it's an initial order. And that's why we had a Big Bang. You could have had just a steady state universe where there was an infinite amount of space that always existed, and things were flying around in it, and there was no beginning of time. But that's not the case. We have a Big Bang. And why is that? Well, because you need an initial starting order. You need an acorn to begin it all. That's why there's a Big Bang. You need a first order. That's why there's a God. Because you need a God to supply that first order. Because material things subject to time can't do it. Caused things can't supply a first order. Can't be done. It's impossible. You need an uncaused God to be able to do that. So the argument about whether God exists or not really boils down to whether you need a first order or not. Because if you need a first order, you gotta have something that's not subject to time and is immaterial to supply that initial order. That means you have to have a God. So atheists know this, and their arguments are always about trying to supply this first order or information, this first information, some other way than besides having to have it appear out of nowhere, because that implies a God. So even though that's the only way it can be done, atheists will nonetheless dream up delusions to try to convince you that you can get first order or first information some other way. For instance, a lot of times what they'll say is, well, there never was a first order. There's just an infinite regress of prior order with no beginning. So one of the main arguments they like to use is time didn't begin. Time didn't begin. There always was something, and all order derives from prior order, and there was an endless, infinite, regressive time in the past. There's always been order. And so that's where our order comes from. Well, the problem with that argument is time has to begin. The Big Bang proves it, but there's also a logical reason that time has to begin. I did a video about this, the beginningless time paradox. But essentially, if time receded infinitely into the past, then there would always be an infinite amount of time that hasn't been traversed before the present moment could arrive. And that would mean the present moment could never arrive, because there's always prior time without limit that has to be traversed before you reach the present moment. So the present moment could never arrive. So because we know the present moment arrives, we know that the distant past in time could not have been infinite. It had to start. So there's just the logical proof that time has to begin, as well as the Big Bang itself proves that time has a beginning. But that won't stop lots of people from claiming time always existed, even though that makes no logical sense. That's one illusion or delusion atheists try to use. You'll hear scientists and physicists making similar claims. They'll propose theories about the universe, which essentially implies that past time was infinite. You'll get things like, well, the universe was cyclic, the cyclic universe theory. Cyclic universe theory. And what this essentially means is that our universe was born from another universe. And that universe was born from another universe. And so on, and so on, and so on, infinitely into the past. So, the idea is, or maybe the universe begins with the Big Bang and expands, and then eventually at some point it recollapses back into a singularity. And then it re-explodes again. No, that's another version of the cyclical universe. The multiverse is another theory that claims time has always existed. You could have universes bubbling off new universes. Of course, none of this is provable. This is all science fiction. But these atheists, physicists, and philosophers even will they'll ignore the fact that none of this is provable and it doesn't even make logical sense. They'll just try to make you think that it's the truth. Well, it's not the truth. The evidence is that the universe is not cyclic. In fact, we've recently discovered that the expansion of the universe, is actually accelerating. It's getting faster. So the universe isn't going to the evidence is not that the universe is going to recollapse. Rather, the evidence is that the universe is going to keep expanding and at an accelerating rate until, forever, or until it just disappears from lack of substance, because it gets so spread so thin, it just disappears. So this isn't even a theory that has good evidence behind it. And the multiverse is, that's a favorite of a lot of physicists today, but there's no way you can prove that. You would have to leave the universe in order to prove there's another universe, and you can't do that. It violates fundamental law principle of conservation of energy. Your energy, if you left the universe to go see if there was another universe, you would pop out of existence. That's a violation of the conservation of law of energy. You can't pop out of existence. You can't leave the universe like that. That's a major violation of a basic law of physics. So there's no way to prove a multiverse. There's no way to prove it. It's unprovable. It's unprovable. It's not even scientific. So it's science fiction. It's just somebody's fantasy, really. So that's one way to like to attack this idea that you need a first order, it's an illogical. That's an illogical answer. Another way they might try to claim that first order doesn't need a god to supply it is they'll try something like, well, there was time travel and information from the future traveled into the past through some sort of exotic particles, like tachyons or something like that. And that's where our information came from, our initial information came from. This is sort of a retro causality argument. Retrocausality, meaning the future causes the past. Now, of course, that makes no sense whatsoever. The future doesn't cause the past. The past causes the future. But that doesn't stop people from coming up with these wild ideas. And, the idea that the future causes the past is extremely problematic. First, time travel is impossible. Second, if it was, you create paradoxes. Such as, well, let's say I traveled back in time and I killed my own grandfather. Well, then my grandfather couldn't have my father, who would eventually have me. So then I eliminated my own timeline, haven't I? So how could I exist? So, if I went back in time and killed my own grandfather, then where did I come from? Right? I killed the guy who's responsible for me even being born. So I killed him, boom. So where did I come from? A human body is also information. And where did that information come from? Well, because, after I killed my grandfather and then events go on and I'm never born, then the information that is me never came to exist in the first place. So where did I come from? Where did my information come from? I'm sitting in the past looking over a dead body wondering, now what do I do? Where did my information come from? That's a theory of information from nothing. So essentially my information came from nothing. Well, that's impossible because you can't get something from nothing. So that's sort of paradox, and it's a major violation of a basic philosophical principle that you can't get something from nothing. Or that nothing comes from nothing, that can't possibly be correct either. So these ideas of retrocausality and the future causing the past are illogical and full of paradoxes, and there's no demonstrated proof that this actually occurs. You can't travel into the future or into the past. There's no such thing as time travel. There's no H.G. Wells time travel machine that anyone's ever created. It's because it's impossible. So those are some of the attempts atheists and certain physicists and scientists will try to explain away where the initial information for the universe comes from. Because they know that this is a major problem for them. And they know that this points toward a God. They know it. And they hate that. So they dream up, these illogical, delusional arguments. And a lot of people fall for this stuff. But it's not true. It's not proven. And it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. There has to be a God for there to be initial order or initial information in the universe. You can't get something from nothing. Initial information or order can't come from nothing. Right? There's a basic rule of ancient philosophy called ex nihilo nihil fit, meaning nothing comes from nothing. You can't get something from nothing. So you can't get first order or initial order for the information from nothing. Can't be done. So it's got to come from somewhere. But it can't be a caused thing. It can't be the universe. Time's got to begin, so that only leaves one solution. There's only one solution. And it's uncaused God. That's it. That's the only solution. Has to be that. So, you know, you can think about it yourself if you want. Where does new information come from? Out of thin air? Pops out of nowhere? No. Well, how does it come to exist? Right? It's got to be an uncaused God. It has to be. There's no other explanation. None. These don't work. They're not logical. They don't work. Got to be an uncaused God. So I hope you understand the first order argument, the need for an initial supply of information for the universe to even exist to begin with, and that can only come from an uncaused God. There's no other way for that to happen. There's no mathematical way for that to happen. Math can't create itself, and there's no physical way for that to happen. That which is created cannot create the initial information that created it. That's illogical. It doesn't even make sense. So there's an inescapable conclusion that uncaused God must be real. Has to be. All right. I hope you understand this sort of information-based argument. It's a cousin of the first cause argument, which is a very famous cosmological argument for the existence of God. And it may very well be the thing that helps you understand why an uncaused God is real and is absolutely necessary for anything to exist at all. If you like what you heard, please press the subscribe button or leave a comment below, and maybe I'll address it in the comment section. Otherwise, take care, everybody.